Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IDA screening series. I'm thrilled to have you all here. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the public programs and events manager at the International Documentary Association. I'm sure you're used to seeing my face by now. I just want to start out with, as always, with a brief land acknowledgement. I come to you today on the occupied land of the Tongva and Chumash people, who have been stewards of this land for generations in the territory now known as Los Angeles. First, also, I'd like to give a big shout out to our media sponsor, IndieWire, for helping to provide us support through the screening series and coverage of these wonderful films. Also would like to acknowledge support from KCRW to help bring the screening series to you as well. And before we get started, just to inform you all, you can watch all of our films as an IDA member and watch all of these conversations, even if you're not an IDA member, over at documentary.org/screening series. Awesome. Okay, just letting Andrea catch up here. So before we get started, I mean, you don't need to hear from me anymore. I'm going to introduce here Anne Thompson, editor-at-large at IndieWire, who's going to be our fearless leader for what is sure to be an amazing conversation.
Hello,
Hi.
Cassidy.
Hello.
So are we all set here? I am going to introduce Bryan Fogel. We spoke last time around when he ended up winning the Oscar for Icarus in 2018, Best Documentary Feature. And hello, Bryan. Welcome back to the IDA. How are you?
I'm good, and it's wonderful to be back and talking to all of you.
Yes, I miss the audience. You know, we would ordinarily be in a theater and there would be some interaction, and I wish we could get their questions, but I will forge ahead. I will do my best on my own. And I know you can take care of yourself. I remember when you broke out at Sundance and you had killed yourself to get Icarus ready in time for the festival. And then you went back to the editing room and tore it all up again and completely re-reported the movie by the time you came out. And you know, what you did was extraordinary in terms of revealing what your whistleblower, Dr. Grigory Rodchenkov, did, you know, to lead the Olympic Committee to ban Russia from the 2018 Winter Olympic Games. How is he? What's happened to Dr. Grigory Rodchenkov?
He is okay. I'm not able to, you know, like directly talk to him. I mean, I have over the last couple of years, you know, coordinating with his protection and his legal. But you know, he's in very good spirits. You know, had the current pandemic not happened, if you'd followed the story, Russia was supposed to turn over all this evidence to be reinstated, and when they turned over the evidence, they had again essentially fabricated all of these spreadsheets that Rodchenkov had already given over to the Olympic Committee and to the World Anti-Doping Agency. So Russia was actually appearing right before COVID to be on the verge of being banned again for the 2020 Summer Games. And Gregory has been the, you know, the key whistleblower and key informant in that, and so he's continued his work to try to, you know, bring you know, the past to light, and you know, he's just a forever optimistic person, and it's always surprising to me because of what he's been through. He's essentially lived in isolation alone for the last 3 years. The last time he saw his family was when he boarded a plane to Los Angeles in November of 2015, fleeing Russia. And here he is, you know, 5 years later, still fighting the fight. And But it hasn't gotten easier for him. There's a target on his back. There's repeated intelligence information that, you know, he is actively being looked for and sought. And of course, we see with the current poisoning of Navalny just months ago, Russia doesn't seem to like to forget or forgive. And Gregory certainly has made that sacrifice and brings into question of, you know, the cost of blowing the whistle in our current situation.
Well, that's where you headed when you went to document what happened with the journalist Khashoggi in this film, The Dissident. What was your process in terms of figuring out what your next project was going to be after after Icarus?
Well, you know, after Icarus, having like gone through that journey, and especially with Rodchenkov, where, you know, it was kind of outside the realm of what you might just consider being a filmmaker, a documentarian, where I had really gotten so personally involved in this person's life, became their protector, became their confidant, helped them with their legal, helped them, I mean, bring their evidence forward. And then of course, you know, that journey with Icarus, and, you know, and the wonderful kind of accolades that came with it, I really, coming through that, I felt like I had a responsibility, and I almost felt like a burden, that I wanted to see to it that I was going to continue to tell stories that I felt would matter, that I felt would have an impact in the world. And so I was, you know, looking and seeking what that was going to be. And there were projects coming my way, and I, you know, wasn't interested in them. And of course, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, as this started to unfold in the media in those first couple weeks of October, you know, the light bulb kind of went off in my head, and I said, oh, wow, not only is this just absolutely gut-wrenching and horrific, this is a fight for freedom of press. This is a fight for freedom of speech. This is focused on human rights. This is what we're going through in our own country and fighting for democracy. And as I started to read about Jamal and learn what he was writing about, I saw that what was being presented in the media, which was this guy who was Muslim Brotherhood and terrorist sympathizer, and in many outlets kind of like, oh, he had it coming to him, was so far from the truth. That this was a moderate, enlightened thinker who loved his country, who simply was advocating not for an overthrow of the kingdom or the government, but basically to include the people in the process. And through that use of his pen to write his thoughts leads to his murder. And so as I kind of got into this story, it felt like it checked these boxes of what I was looking for in my next project. But again, it became really a very, very personal, emotional journey, because in order to make the film, it was, how was I going to gain the trust of his grieving fiance, Hatice Cengiz? How was I going to gain the trust of the Turkish authorities, the Turkish government, to provide me with this evidence? How was I going to gain the trust of Omar Abdulaziz, the young Saudi dissident in self-exile in Montreal, who they had come to try to rendition and kill like Khashoggi? And how was I going to bring these people together and craft this story to present Jamal's life in a way that hadn't been presented on CNN or BBC or in the media? And that was really the long journey of making The Dissident.
What moved me so much about this story is getting to know who Khashoggi actually was, you know, behind the global headlines. He was a man in love. He was in love with the woman who was waiting for him outside the consulate, which is heartbreaking. And he was a human being, and he was a responsible professional journalist who I could identify with, you know. He was one of us. He spoke truth to power and got killed for it. Did he not realize that he was in danger when he went to the Saudi Arabian embassy in Istanbul? Why did he take that chance?
There's two things, and I don't get into the minutia of this in the film and in the construction, but he was needing the paperwork to marry Hatice, because in Turkish law he had to prove that he was divorced to be ordered to be able to, you know, to marry someone new, and that was very important for Hatice and for Hatice's family. So he was willing, you know, to take that risk. And he went to Washington, and he actually met with Mohammed bin Salman's brother at the time, who was the U.S. ambassador to Washington. And he went into the consulate, the embassy, and he told him what he wanted to do. And he came out of there very, very surprised, because they were very kind to him. They said, "Oh yes, no problem, no problem. We'll help you with this, Jamal. We'll help you with this, Jamal. But you need to get this paperwork in Istanbul. You need to do this in Istanbul." So he left this meeting going, "Oh, okay, they're going to help me get the paperwork. No big deal." But of course, that was a trap. So he then goes to the consulate the first time, and when he shows up for the paperwork, they tell him, "No problem, no problem. Just come back, you know, in a week, and we'll have everything ready for you." So he went, you know, now in Istanbul, believing that everything was fine. But what we know, this was them setting the trap and then planning to murder him. But when he did go into the consulate that day, you know, he was, you know, cautious and fearful, and he left his phones with Hatice, and he told Hatice, "If anything happens to me, if for some reason I don't come out, you know, in an hour, please call Yasin Aktay," who appears in the film briefly, who is part of President Erdogan's AK party and is a politician, but was a close friend of Jamal. "And please let Yasin know that I'm not out of the consulate." And that was what really started this. So, I mean, clearly Khashoggi was concerned. He left his phones with Hatice. And in the transcript, which is part of the film, and even though there's been portions of it leaked, the Turkish provided me with the entire transcript, and that is still not in the world. I mean, it's U.S. intelligence, British intelligence, and essentially the Dissident, my film, has the transcript. And in that transcript, you know, they actually are saying to Khashoggi, "Well, send a text," and he goes, "I don't have my phones." And they go, "Well, where are your phones?" He goes, I left them with my wife outside." So, you know, clearly there was that thinking that something might go wrong, but I don't think he could have ever imagined, of course, what transpired.
Well, what you show in the movie is horrifying, of course, because the transcripts reveal that what really happened was something out of some bad thriller. Really horrific violence was done to him that's beyond imagining. And you actually trace through Jeff Bezos and the WhatsApp that he was hacked by the Saudi Arabians, and that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was in direct contact with him. This is just unbelievable stuff. You really do establish that the Crown Prince was probably responsible for Khashoggi's death.
Yeah, the Bezos matter came to me about 6 months before it became public, and if you might recall, the story of Bezos's hack became public literally a day before our premiere at the Sundance Film Festival. And the reason for that, kind of like Icarus, was we didn't want to be, as a film, the bearer of that information. We wanted to make sure that, you know, a substantial media organization, the Washington Post, the New York Times, others that reported on it, had put this story forward so that when it was in the film, it was already in the news and it had been substantiated. But, you know, in that process, I'd worked closely with those investigators to build that into the film, because it was so shocking and so startling. And when I set out to make The Dissident, I didn't know that. And yet, as I was making it, and people were aware that I was making the film, I started being provided, you know, evidence. And here was this attack on Bezos, and the scary, scary takeaway from this was, I mean, if you can do this to the richest man in the world, who can't you go after? And this real understanding that our government can't protect us, and these cyber technologies, which are now so pervasive, are allowing, you know, state agents to not only invade our lives, but in the case of Khashoggi, you know, use that to murder someone, or in the case of Bezos, use that to embarrass them and discredit them. So yeah, it was startling and you know, very, very emotional for me in the crafting of this film.
Well, it seems like you had an awful lot of information and you found out a lot of stuff, but you managed, and I credit you for this, to structure it in such a way that it's accessible, and you use graphics in a very clever way to get a lot of the information across. And you use your collaborator, your frequent collaborator, Mark Monroe, to help you with that as well. Talk about that. I mean, you two had to figure out how to manage this narrative in a way that may not have been really obvious.
Well, to me, I think much like Icarus, and what I learned in making that film is that if you can engage an audience and get them on the edge of their seat and make them forget that they're watching a documentary, but instead that they're watching a film, they're watching a piece of cinema, and that in this case the story is, as sad as it is, it's a thriller. And so I wanted to see to, in the crafting of it, that I could bring in those elements that would keep the audience engaged, that would propel the narrative, and that hopefully in doing so, you become emotionally involved in the characters, you care about what's going on, and you walk out of the film not with just an understanding of what's happened, but because you're hopefully impacted by what you've seen in the film, that you want to do something. And so Mark Monroe, who and we worked together on Icarus, from the outset kind of said, okay, how do we craft what feels like, you know, a feature thriller in the form of a documentary? And there were so many of these big elements, like the bees and the flies, the essentially Omar's fight against the Saudi trolls. And, you know, I'm assuming if you're watching this interview, you've now seen the film. And of course, there was so many ways that you could bring that forward, but that concept became, okay, how do we kind of visually present this in an exciting way that it's not, you know, just a whole slew of information being, you know, thrown at you, that also visually allows you to kind of understand the good guys, the bad guys, the war that's happening in essentially this cybersphere in social media and Twitter, and hopefully keep it exciting and dynamic. But at the same time, you go, oh my God, now I understand what happened and how it happened. And so Mark and I were constantly kind of coming up with ideas in the structuring of you know, ultimately the script, because all documentaries, even though people don't realize it, end up being scripted. They just end up being scripted through all the footage that you've actually shot. And that became kind of the process of how we could keep this story going forward and keep unveiling, you know, portions of the crime that are shocking and startling, and also the emotional journey of Hatice and Omar along the way to kind of weave that narrative.
So when you took the movie to Sundance 2020, did you also kill yourself to get it finished in time for that deadline?
Yeah, yeah.
This is your pattern.
It was, you know, I started making I wanted to make the film literally. It was October 16th, the day that Saudi Arabia actually confessed that he had in fact died inside the consulate. I reached out to the Washington Post that day and sent an email, and was so warmly responded to. And they said, hey, if you want to come to Washington and meet with us, we'd be happy to see how we could help. And so I was on the ground in Washington, October 22nd, meeting with Fred Ryan and Marty Barron and the team there. But of course, I didn't have, you know, the participation of everyone else. And I then flew to Istanbul. I was able to arrange a meeting with Hatice in early November, but she was not willing to start working. And I ended up spending the next 5 weeks in Istanbul. And I share this story because it goes into Sundance. And literally, I met with her probably 15 times in those 5 weeks. And every time I didn't bring my camera, I didn't bring a crew. We just got together and bonded, and you know, it was just crying and crying. It was so absolutely heartbreaking. And I said to Hatice, I said, look, if you trust me and if you'll let me do this, I promise you I will protect Jamal. I promise you I will protect you. I promise you. And after the 5 weeks in Istanbul, she was still on the fence, and we had not filmed anything. And I came back to the US right after New Year's. We kept in correspondence. And about 3 weeks later, she said, hey, Bryan, I'm going to be speaking at the EU in Brussels. It'll be my first time leaving Turkey. It'll be my first time in Western Europe. If you want to come and meet me there, we can start filming. And that was what began the journey. And similarly with Omar, so even though I was in the deep process of wanting to make the film and building these relationships, it was really not until about February that I was able to actually start filming. And Omar was a similar process where there was 4 months of trust building with him. And what we would do is every time I'd shoot with him, I'd leave him with all the camera cards. And I'd go, Omar, these are yours. And when you get to a place that you feel like maybe you really want to work with me, maybe you'll give me those camera cards back. And it was literally May or June until Omar actually one day in Montreal, at this point he had, 40 camera cards. At the end of the day, he said, brother, and he gives me all these back. He goes, you're my brother. I know we're going to do great things together. And he gave me all those camera cards back, and we cried, and that was the journey of making this. So when Sundance gives you a call and, basically beginning of December and say your film's in, and we had literally raced like crazy just to get them in assembly. We had 6 weeks to finish the film. And, it was like, how are we going to do this? So when we got to Sundance, it was just doing everything we could to put our best foot forward. But in my heart, kind of like with Icarus, it was like, the film's not finished. I want that time. And so while Sundance was wonderful and we had a wonderful response, immediately after Sundance, it was, okay, how do I go and polish this? And we spent another 6 months polishing it. And one of the kind of, I don't know if it's humorous, but I had been working with the Turkish at this point for a year to try to get this transcript. And they had an idea that they could give me the transcript basically 2 weeks before Sundance. And like a 60 minutes piece, I just, oh, here's the transcript. And I had been explaining to them, I'm like, look, guys, I really need time.
This is a movie.
I want to build this into a character. I want to make sure that we can do justice to this. And so the scene, the movie at Sundance of the transcript and the actual murder is not only about half the length. It
Hmm.
was just, it was like, okay, now we got this, and it was like, how do we quickly try to get this in there? And after Sundance, it was, okay, let's really build the emotional impact of this. Let's show this transcript. Let's bring this story to life. And at that point, the Turkish had even offered me some of the audio, and I made a
I was just going
choice
to
that,
say, you use the audio against the, it's really upsetting the way you
yeah.
manipulate that.
And so post Sundance, it was really about finishing the score, the sound design, the polish, the graphics, and so it was kind of like Icarus in that regard, that we had, you know, I mean, literally, we just we're going back right now today to change a couple of the end cards, because the Saudis have, because the G20 is now November
So
20th, and by the
they,
time the film comes out, the G20 will have happened.
so they also put some people in jail, right?
That's a joke.
Ah,
What Anne's referring to here is the trial. So uh, Saudi Arabia basically has ran away from all justice, has refused for Turkey to prosecute these crimes, to bring any of these people to justice. The United Nations has refused on the General Assembly and Security Council to take this up as well. And here we have the G20 happening in Saudi Arabia on November 20th, where the 20 richest leaders and countries in the world will essentially go to Riyadh, or they haven't quite figured out if it's going to be virtual, and essentially kiss the ring of Mohammed bin Salman for his investment and his money. And so the
our own
Saudis
president is
essentially,
one of those people, right?
our own president is not only one of those people, he is, you know, if you read the stories and Bob Woodard's book that just came out last month, our president brags that he saved Mohammed bin Salman's ass, that he literally made a very conscious decision to sweep this under the carpet for Mohammed bin Salman and continue to
Why
sell the
is it,
Saudis weapons.
is it just business? Is it about money as usual with him?
I think that we have to look at beyond just the Trump administration. Um, I think for
Bush
the
did it
current
too, didn't he?
administration, look, administration after administration has done it. And on a global level, it's being done as well. I mean, the world oftentimes takes its direction from the US. And so, okay, the British are still selling them weapons. The French are still selling them weapons. The Germans are still, you know, taking investment and money from them. SoftBank is the world's largest, you know, hedge fund, and that's basically all Saudi money. They just put $500 million into Live Nation. They put $500 million into AMC Theaters. They had put a $400 million investment into Endeavor Content that Endeavor then returned. They're paying, you know, major celebrities like Jason Momoa to come to Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is a continual whitewashing of their human rights abuses in exchange for their money. And the world, not just President Trump, but the world leaders are willing to essentially look the other way. That there were 800 and some odd beheadings in Saudi Arabia last year. If you look at the human rights reports on these beheadings, like 70–80% of these were literally for people who were tweeting, who were just voicing a voice against the government. Young kids, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 20-year-olds. And yet the world is willing to look the other way for their money, for their investment. So while Trump's, you know, response has been, you know, horrendous, he is not alone. The one thing I will say is, on Khashoggi's second anniversary of his murder, just a few weeks ago, October 2nd, Joe Biden released a formal statement saying that if he were elected president, that he plans to re-examine the U.S.-Saudi relationship, that he plans to work towards sanctions, and that he plans to work for justice for Jamal. So I do believe that there is, you know, an intention there, and also bipartisan in Congress. And there's a part in the film, and if you remember, where we have leaders kind of speaking about it, and I intentionally chose 3 Republicans, Lindsey Graham, Rand Paul, Bob Corker, to basically, you know, admonish the current administration rather than taking Democrats, because I wanted to show the bipartisan support within Congress and Senate to do something, and that it was actually the president himself who was stopping U.S. Congress from taking action. So, you know, so I'm optimistic that there can be change, and I'm optimistic that this film, if the world can see it, that emotional impact of falling in love with Hatice and falling in love with Jamal and Omar leads people to want to ask their governments, Macron, don't go to the G20, you know, we have to do something, Merkel. We have to do something, Biden or Trump, and that's what I'm really optimistic. And Hatice is so committed to this fight, and I'm committed to continue to just help her however I can.
Well, when you did show the movie at Sundance, part of the goal there was to find a distributor. And I understand that a lot of the big studio and big company outlets weren't willing to pick up the film. You ended up with Briarcliff Entertainment, a reputable distributor, but not one of the big ones. What was that about?
Well, look, first off, I'm very grateful to Tom Ortenberg and Briarcliff. You know, Tom did Spotlight, he did Crash, Fahrenheit 9/11. So he has a you know, a reputation of taking on difficult films, fighting for his films, and so, you know, I really feel passionate about him, and we've been able to also bring on international partners such as Altitude in the UK, and DCM in Germany, and Mad Men in Australia, and really good companies that want to fight for this film. So, you know, I'm optimistic that, you know, COVID aside, that, you know, we're, that, you know, come hell or high water, we're going to somehow get this film out there. That said, you know, I certainly wanted one of the big global streamers to take this film, not anything to do with financial consideration, but because of the platform that they have to let the world see this film and discover this film and learn. And
what about Amazon, Bezos's company?
You know, Amazon recently announced just months ago that they acquired a company called Souk, which is the Amazon of Saudi Arabia. And so Amazon is doing business with Saudi Arabia. And I think that it's a situation where it's very easy for these big media companies to stand up and say, you know, we want to do something, or to come forward and, you know, BLM and other movements, but the actual action behind that becomes very different. And I think in this case, what we saw was that essentially money, shareholder accountability, and not being willing to fight the fight for human rights, you know, ultimately led to those decisions. And it's disappointing, but I'm also very, you know, optimistic about the future of this film, and hopefully, you know, it will eventually wind up, you know, being able to be streamed on a Netflix or an Amazon, so that the world will have, you know, tremendous access to this film, would be my hope.
But at the moment, it's a theatrical release. Do you have a release date?
December 18th is our release date, and we're, you know, working, you know, daily to try to to pivot and figure out. We were originally going to put the film out end of summer, and then October 2nd, and now December 18th. You know, we're doing everything we can, and we've, you know, arranged to have a I guess it's called a PVOD partner. So, you know, if we're having problems with theaters, it will be on iTunes, and we're hearing good things out of our UK partner. So I just want people to see the film.
I can imagine.
You
You
know,
should.
because the response when people have seen it, we were at Zurich 2 weeks ago for the Zurich Film Festival, because I actually had in-person screenings, and Hatija came with us, and I brought her onto stage, and as she comes onto stage, everybody just gets on their feet, and you're watching the audience wipe tears from their eyes, and you're watching the power that this woman, I mean, she is so extraordinary. She is so brave, and the way that she has come through this loss is pretty inspirational if you meet her. She's so optimistic, and every time I see her, she just goes, "Bryan, be proud of yourself. You're doing good work. You're doing good work. We're gonna get there. We're gonna, you know." And so she's so, I don't know how she does it, and so like my commitment to this film is really kind of, I just want to honor my word to her, and I want people to see it.
Well, you carry on. What are you doing next, Bryan? Have you thought about it even? I know you get very consumed with what you're
Yeah,
currently obsessed with.
when I get into
You
something,
put your
I
all
really
in there.
it just overcomes my life, and the Dissident has still been really, because I've been very deeply involved in helping now with the distribution and the marketing and building the materials and the trailers and all that stuff. But I've been quietly working on the follow-up to Icarus, which you are the first person hearing this, but the story is really about kind of the cost of being a whistleblower, and a very, very personal film in that regard. And I'm working on another project that surrounds a very high profile poisoning, I guess we might say. Uh, and
Going back to the Russians, are we?
I don't know. And I'm looking at some other ones. I really, you know, that I really want to stay working in stuff that has components of human rights and protecting free speech and journalism, and trying to bring stories to the world that people might otherwise not get to see or learn about. And I'm optimistic that these streamers will come back into the fold. I think a new administration might help in that too, because I think there's a lot of fear among these streamers as well, because they're not getting support from the current administration in putting forward content that might, you know, make a change in this world. Instead, you know, they get you know, admonished for doing that, or in the case of even, you know, Amazon or Bezos, every single time that Trump attacks him, he attacks him as, you know, Washington Post owner Jeff
Right.
Bezos, you know.
Right.
So he doesn't attack him as the owner of Amazon. He attacks him because he owns the Washington Post, and the Washington Post keeps writing negatively about him. And so I think it is a tough place for some of these media companies to be, when you have an administration that's, you know, that's fighting you.
Well, let's hope that there's a brave new world ahead. That's all we can do.
Yeah,
For the moment, I
I'm
voted.
I'm optimistic.
I did my part.
Me too. I am just praying, you know, and I am just praying that the mail gets there. I mean,
I
my
got a
mail
ballot
box,
tracker thing that they got mine.
I just sent mine in, and I have a mailbox down the street from where I live, and about a month and a half ago, this mailbox just vanished. It was gone. And I went to the post office and I go, "What happened to the mailbox?" And they go, "Oh, you know, cuts in the postal system. They took the mailbox." I'm like, wow. And if you look on the post, there's been like these pictures of collections of thousands and thousands of mailbox in
Over a
what
million.
are considered, blue states, and that it literally took the mailbox. So I had to, go make a special drive to the mailbox. So I'm optimistic my ballot will get there.
I'm sure it will. All right, Bryan. Well, you keep up the good work, please. Keep up the fight. And we look forward to whatever it is that you do next. And more people will see the movie when it gets finally released. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. And one thing I'll say is, if you're inspired by the film, if you go on our website, there's a place to enter your email, and the Human Rights Foundation is who backed this film. It was backed purely through charitable donations, and it was the Human Rights Foundation that made this happen. And they're continuing to do work on behalf for justice for Jamal. So we're going to be coming up with plans like petitions of writing your congressmen, writing your senators, to try to take action. So when you watch the film, as upsetting or depressing as it may be inspired that you can make a difference, and that your voice can matter. And we're working on these kind of campaigns, and the Human Rights Foundation is a wonderful place to go to find information about this. And because without them, this film would have not been possible.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you. Thank you, IDA. Bye.